Hello everyone! So as expected, I have spent this past week mourning the passing of the one true king of Waco Mundo, and now that I've grieved properly, let's get back into Bleach and see how everyone else reacted, since Aizen did not care whatsoever. But maybe someone did. Starrk's reaction to seeing Barragan die and to seeing Aizen do absolutely nothing about it caught me off guard. Instead of getting angry or wanting revenge on the people that killed his ally, or instead of being upset by Aizen's callousness, Starrk's initial response is to just stop trying altogether. He's very disheartened and would rather go home and take a nap, which is very in line with what we've seen from him, but I love that Lilynette gets him a little motivated to get up and get back into the fight. In a way, after learning that Lilynette is part of Starrk, it's really just him motivating himself, I guess, finding a reason to carry on despite how downtrodden he's feeling after all of this. And the reason why he gets back up is the most interesting part to me and stood out during my read. It's all for a reason that eventually helps build toward a full understanding of Starrk as a character. Starrk gets up because he doesn't want any more of his allies to die. It turns out that he actually cares about the other Espada, which is so unique compared to how the rest of them view each other. Like, think about it. When good old Aranero died, no one really cared much. Some even ridiculed him for his failure. But Starrk kind of just wanted to go back to sleep. At the time, I thought maybe it was because he just didn't care at all, and didn't want to even bother waking up over someone dying, but it might actually be that he was just really sad about it and would rather disassociate. But Lilynette was trying to prod him awake, to the point that she was shoving her hand in his mouth and trying to get him up and moving. He was kind of in conflict with himself about Aranyero's death even then. There was the part of him that wanted to go up and do something about it, and the part of him that just wanted to take a nap and just be depressed about it. It's really interesting looking back at that scene, knowing that both of the people in that conversation are Starrk. So his reaction to Aranyero's death is actually very different than it initially seemed to me. But what it comes down to is that Aizen's forces have not been shown to actually give a damn about each other so far for the most part. So for Starrk to get up in order to help protect his allies that are left, it's kind of a big deal. It's enough to get him to put his own life on the line to try to protect the teammates that remain. It really surprised me, but by the time we learned more about him by the end of these chapters, it made a whole lot of sense. We'll get more into that specifically in a bit. Initially, I was just flabbergasted that one of the people on Aizen's team legitimately cares for his teammates. Starrk, who initially seemed like the most disinterested of all of the Espada, like the one that didn't care at all, may actually be more invested than anyone else on that side of the war. He cares a lot about the people that he's fighting alongside. Once he gets back in the fight, it's a little moment, but I appreciated Starrk's perspective on the Visored after seeing them wear their masks. He recognizes that they aren't so different from Hollows, something that we've talked about as being one of the main themes running through this arc. The Arankars and the Visored are both hybrids in a way, coming from opposite ends of the spectrum. Arankar are Hollows that have become more like Soul Reapers, while Visored are Soul Reapers who became more like Hollows. There are a lot of similarities, and I just love that this thematic element keeps getting reinforced. And I appreciated Starrk recognizing how similar they are, whereas Barragan saw Hachi with his mask on and took it as like a disgraceful insult for a Soul Reaper to pretend to be a Hollow. So I thought that was interesting. So Starrk fights Love and Rose from the Visored, and Love manages to get a big hit in on Starrk using his big Oni club, only to see that Starrk is suddenly with a pack of wolves. But they're not normal wolves. No, they look like blue fire, and they explode when they bite. At first, the Visored think that the wolves are a lot like the Saros that Starrk is shooting from his guns, but Starrk reveals that they're much more than that. The wolves are parts of Starrk's own soul. Okay, first off, this is the perfect animal for Starrk to be associated with. There's obviously the idea of the lone wolf, and Stark's whole aspect of death he represents, as we've talked about, is loneliness. It is the perfect animal to apply to him, and I love that it's even integrated into his Resurrection's design with all of the fur lining. That makes a lot of sense now looking at him. That's a great little piece of visual and thematic storytelling. A lone wolf hoping to find a pack to belong to. It's too perfect. Kubo did a great job tying all of Starrk in together. A lot like how he did with Bargain's design, and with most of his designs really. Stark's design is pretty perfect as far as what it actually tells us about him. And the explanation for the soul tearing that he does is kind of wild. This is Stark's main ability, and was apparently how he split himself into two separate people to begin with. These wolves are just him splitting off more pieces of his soul, I guess, though in a much more limited way, since it doesn't seem like these wolves have their own individuality or anything. They're just weapons, but extremely powerful ones. These are massive explosions going off, which kind of makes clear how powerful Starrk is. Just think about it. These wolves are just parts of him, portions of his soul, and that is what's happening. It's crazy, and a perfect example of his spiritual strength, but we'll get more into that in a little bit. I did like that Starrk gives Love and Rose a chance to flee and a chance to live. It just emphasizes how much Starrk really doesn't want to fight. He seemed to have really only gotten interested when he saw the Soul Reapers using their Bankais. Back then it seemed like maybe he just wanted to see what those could do, to kind of compare his own power against them. But now, knowing what I've learned in these chapters, he watched those Bankai attacks seemingly hurt Barragan, trap Harabel. Maybe it wasn't so much wanting to measure up to those Bankai as much as he saw that, oh, the Soul Reapers have ways of hurting my friends and hurting my allies, and now I have to get serious because I'm watching the people on my team starting to get kind of wrecked by these. So a lot of this is so interesting to look back on in retrospect. A lot of Starrk moments now after these chapters kind of are much more telling than they were at the time. It's pretty great. I like that Kubo used the Vizard's arrival and their fighting as a way to kind of make me stop thinking about Stark's initial opponent, which was perfect for when Shunsui launched a sneak attack. When I first saw the panel with Shunsui coming out of the shadow, I was really excited because I love me some shadow powers, whether it's one of my favorite Naruto characters, Shikamaru, the incredibly underrated Gecko Moria from One Piece. Long story, I love Moria. I know that's an unpopular opinion, but I don't care. There's also the terrifying Pride in Full Metal Alchemist who uses shadow powers, and it's really scary. Or even Kido, the psychic guy from Yu Yu Hakusho, who gets such a great moment in one of that show's best episodes. Anyway, I was so glad Shunsui was going to have shadow powers, only to discover that he doesn't. I'm an idiot, he doesn't. I was excited for about 30 seconds, it was amazing. But no, Shunsui's Shikai abilities are much crazier than just manipulating shadows. They threw me for a serious loop as I was trying to understand the mechanics of these abilities as he was explaining them. And here's what I got from it, and correct me if I'm wrong. Shunsui Zanpakuto can apparently manipulate reality, kind of, in a given space. The world in its proximity becomes like a game, like a child's game. The space around the sword has to follow the rules of the game, and even Shunsui himself has to follow these rules too. It's like a shonen move version of Jumanji, I guess, where the game is affecting reality. Like earlier, he did a move that was apparently based on who can jump higher, and the shadow thing was because of a game of stepping on each other's shadows. They also play a color game where they can only strike a particular color on their opponent that they have to name before they do. They're restricted by the rules of the game, essentially. But all of this is pretty wild because, this Zanpakuto is apparently reliant on kids in the mortal world, or maybe kids that live in the Soul Society too, creating games? Like, the game of basketball, when that was created, did Shunsui get a new way to attack? Could he slam dunk someone? Could he alley-oop someone? I don't know. It's just crazy that Kubo even thought of this as like a power. I never would have concocted this ability if I was coming up with a series. It seems so far out there at first compared to other Shikai abilities, but its potential for fun moments in a fight, or even just its capabilities, are pretty incredible. It adds an odd unpredictability to Shunsui as a fighter, and that kind of adaptable, almost lighthearted vibe suits him because it shrouds a hidden dangerousness that he obviously has, even though he's such a laid-back guy with a colorful outfit, and he's friendly and he doesn't want to fight, but when he fights, there is something dangerous behind all of his smiles. And these abilities do some real damage to Starrk, but that's when we finally get into Starrk's backstory. It's a pretty devastating one. I'd say maybe the most tragic of all of the Espadas that we've seen. The hollow that Starrk and Lilynette originally were lived a very lonely life because it was so powerful that no one could even be near it without dying. I guess its spiritual pressure just destroyed any hollows in its presence, which is crazy to imagine and a testament to Starrk's real power. So obviously this killed his social life and made it impossible to be around anyone. So Starrk split his soul into two to avoid being utterly alone, wishing that he was weaker so that he could be part of a group without killing them, or hoping that someone as strong as him could come along so they wouldn't die from being around him. It's just very sad, and must have been a very difficult existence, burning through anyone that got too close. Like, okay, I know I've been guilty of talking a little bit of crap about Starrk when I've been hyping up my boy King Barry, but I recognize that this alone is an insane example of the difference in Starrk and Barragan's power. As much as I don't want to admit it, I completely recognize this says everything. Barragan had legions of hollows in his court, hanging around him, ready to protect him or kill each other for him, but they could exist in his presence. All of those hollows probably would have been dead just by being near Starrk. That's just crazy. Outside of how frustrating that is for lonely Starrk, having that much power is so scary for everyone else around him. He's practically radioactive. We've seen spiritual pressure affect others, like making people keel over, or like the collective spiritual pressure of captains in Espada killing nearby hollows. But this is all coming solely from one guy. Power-wise, I get it. I get why he's more powerful than Barragan, even if his actual moveset doesn't scare me as much as Barragan's does. But the raw power that this backstory reveals, the fact that you can't even be near the guy without dying, that's scary. So if the Espada numbers are indeed based on spiritual power, then yes, I admit it, Starrk deserves to be number 1. Still, this revelation makes Yami being number 0 feel even sillier because no one was instantly dying standing around Yami, and they still aren't even when he became like Godzilla. It's stupid. Starrk and Barragan seem like so much higher in the echelon of everything than Yami. I hate it. I don't like it still. We'll see if Kubo can turn it around, but right now, everything I've been seeing from these top Espada is just making me angrier at that twist. Anyway, it's just so tragic and sad to imagine how lonely Starrk had to have been to literally kind of carve himself up, rip himself apart, just so he had the illusion that he had someone else to talk to. Even if it's still a part of him, even if it's himself, he was so desperate for company that he turned himself into another person just because he needed someone to talk to. That's so sad, and it's really tough to actually see this backstory and see just how much that must have affected him. I loved it. It's great. Starrk's an incredibly tragic character. Not on the surface, but once you really dig in like this backstory does, oh, it got me. It got me. But yeah, Starrk doesn't fully remember the hollow that he was originally. It might not have been anything like Starrk or Lilynette, but someone else entirely. though I'd like to think that them rejoining as one would at least get them closer to who they used to be, though there's still some separation between their two consciousnesses. Obviously, they aren't completely one person again. But even after they split into two beings, their presence was still too much for most Hollows to be around. There's this incredible image of the two of them sitting together in the desert with these giant piles of corpses around them, and this is when Aizen first discovers them. I think it's worth pointing out how Aizen approaches this first meeting with Starrk, because it's very different than how we saw him recruit Barrigan. Obviously, the circumstances between Starrk and Barrigan at this point in time couldn't be more different, but I think it's fascinating that Aizen is so much less forceful here, even conversationally. With Barrigan, it was a show of force, with thinly veiled threats and trying to make the king submit to his will without question. Aizen showed off his Zanpakuto immediately too, just to make sure he had the upper hand. With Barrigan, it wasn't an offer, it wasn't a request. It was a hostile takeover. With Starrk, he shows a lot more respect. He compliments him, and it's definitely more of an offer to join, like he knows he wouldn't be able to force Starrk to do anything. So I thought that was really interesting. He really lays out, like, he's not saying I'll give you more power. He's telling him, I have friends, and once he finds out Starrk wants friends, which he probably already knew going into this, yeah, that's his angle. That's his angle, that he can be part of something. And it was the right call for recruiting Starrk, so yeah, I just thought that was interesting how Aizen was playing it a lot differently than he played before. The fact that Aizen isn't dying by being near them seems completely new to them, because it is. They have a chance for the first time, apparently, to finally be around someone else. So it's Starrk's first chance to actually be in the same space as others. So of course he accepts, and it's this drive that solidifies his view of his peers. Starrk didn't want to be alone, and it was through Aizen and the Espada that he wasn't anymore. Even Lillinette was just a piece of him that helped curb his loneliness for a time, but Aizen gave him an opportunity and people that could be around him. He was part of something and no longer by himself. That's why Starrk cared about them and didn't want to see any more of his allies die. The friends, quote unquote, they weren't really friends, it seemed, but to Starrk they still meant everything to him because they were all he had ever had. The allies he made while working under Aizen kept him from ever being alone with himself again, and he was desperately trying to hold on to that, even to the very end, when Shunsui cuts him right across his hollow hole and finally defeats the Primera Espada. Starrk's search for companionship is just so tragic and really makes this fight such a sad one. Shunsui and Starrk are so similar, and they seem like they would get along great if they weren't being forced to fight each other. Shunsui is also someone that's at least able to keep up with him, so he's someone strong enough to be safe around. They could have been friends, or drinking buddies, or something. Shunsui could have been exactly the kind of friend that Starrk was desperately searching for. In a way, here are two friends playing a game together. It's just very high stakes and deadly, but it's also close to two friends playing together. I just wish that these two characters could have lowered their weapons and hung out, but fate had other plans. As he's falling, Starrk is regretful that he couldn't pay Aizen back for giving him friends, for giving him allies, for giving him company, for giving him a family in a way. And that's one of his final thoughts, as he feels bad that he couldn't repay Aizen. He did all of this not out of loyalty to Aizen's plans or out of ambition or out of wanting power. Starrk did this because he appreciated that someone finally gave him what he needed and finally gave him a place to be part of something. It's just so pure and innocent, and Starrk wasn't a bad guy. He just was appreciative that Aizen gave him friendship, even if it turns out that Aizen wasn't his friend and that these people weren't his friends. That's part of the tragedy. Starrk cared so much about people that don't care about him because he appreciated what they brought to his life. And Starrk apparently dies fused with Lilynette, the two of them remaining together till the very end. So he may have technically died alone, but he always had a piece of himself keeping him company through the good and through the bad. And Kubo drawing these little sketches at the ends of these chapters of two wolves that probably represent Starrk and Lilynette as they progress through the fight was heartbreaking on its own. Why'd you have to do that, man? And make it hurt even more? Ugh. It was really such a tragic story, like all of it. It was really well done. And I really didn't expect all of this from Starrk. Throughout most of the arc, I only saw him as the chill, bored guy that just wanted to nap, who maybe had the potential to be more, but he exceeded my expectations so much as a character. Being the cool-looking, relaxed but powerful guy is always a vibe, but Starrk really turned out to be one of the most tragic figures so far in the whole series. I don't think he was inherently bad like so many of the other Espada. He really seemed to genuinely just want to have friends and do things alongside them. He wanted to be part of something, and he was. And the worst part is that Starrk feels so indebted to Aizen for giving him friends and companionship, but Aizen, just like he did with Baragan, keeps his back turned and ignores Stark's death. He doesn't try to help him, he doesn't try to say goodbye, he doesn't move to avenge him. Aizen lets Starrk die alone. It's a tragic end for a beautifully tragic character. And Stark's death just continues to highlight how heartless Aizen is, especially when the very next thing he does is strike down Harabel himself. That was insane to me that Aizen gives up on the Espada even as the poor girl is in the middle of a fight. So she tries to fight back, but as expected, she can't defeat Aizen's illusions, and it looks like she's gone too thanks to him. And I feel bad that Harabel didn't get to go down because of a conclusion to an actual fight, but instead is just another victim of Aizen betraying his supposed allies. And Harabel, unfortunately, kind of seems to have gotten the short end of the stick as far as the top 3 Espada go, at least from where I'm sitting. And she is against some incredibly tough competition. We have King Baragan, who obviously I absolutely adore, and we have Starrk, who, if I haven't made it clear over the last, half hour, is an incredible character. So it was tough competition, but she does seem to be not as developed as them. So I do wish she was given a bit more focus and attention, but maybe the point is that Aizen robbed us of seeing more of her. So let's talk a little bit about this Harabel anime flashback, because people said I should watch it, and I don't know how canon this is to Kubo's intent with the manga, so feel free to let me know, but on its own, this backstory was pretty interesting. But I'm a sucker for any focus on hollows, as I'm sure you all know by now, and I've been wanting more background on the Espada in general. So canon or not, I enjoyed seeing this for Harabel. I especially enjoyed her Vasto Lorde design. She looked absolutely awesome like that, and I'm telling you, Harabel's mask should have been on more. Her design is so much more striking with it. And her design here too also played a lot with kind of her shark features a bit more. She looked almost like a Zora from Zelda to me. And I enjoyed seeing the origins of her Fracciones as well, and how close she was with them, wanting to protect each other against any threats. It was cool seeing all of them before they were Arrancars, just working together to survive the harsh environment of Hueco Mundo. Again, I'm not sure how much of this concept is actually Kubo's, but it dove a little more into Harabel's aspect of death, being sacrifice. She didn't like the idea of growing stronger by sacrificing others. She wanted to survive based on her own strength or by being part of a group that all helped each other. That was a pretty neat look at her character and how her gang was willing to sacrifice themselves to protect her, and how much it upset her when they were in danger. It brought some real sympathy toward that whole group. Their closeness was clear in the manga already, but it was nice seeing it more laid out. I liked seeing some of the tribal politics of Hueco Mundo, and of course, I loved seeing my guy King Barry a little more while I can. I also really enjoyed seeing the rise of the Arrancar as Aizen's influence started to take hold of the land. Though Harabel being like a shark while fighting a hammerhead hollow was a little goofy, but also a little fun. And of course, it was nice seeing Aizen recruit Harabel. He naturally played to her desires and offered to be the one that could give them to her, the power to protect her group and be able to overcome any threats that came their way. She sacrificed some of her own philosophies in order to help protect her group, again circling back to her aspect of death. There was some good stuff in this episode, nothing spectacular, but at least Harabel got a little bit more background which she could really use as a character. I just wish that this had been depicted in the actual manga. It would be a lot easier to analyze if I knew where it stood as far as the character on Kubo's intentions and his story, so if anyone knows if this was what he had in mind, please let me know, but for what it was, I just appreciated getting a little bit more time with Harabel, one way or another. I don't dislike Harabel by any means, but I do feel like she ended up being a little underwhelming in the end. So I hope by some miracle Starrk and Harabel don't succumb to their wounds, so we can see more of them down the line. They're both some of the chiller Espada, so I could maybe see them being uneasy allies for our heroes in the future. What's gonna happen to the Hollows and the Arancars and Wako Mundo after all of this? It'd be cool if Starrk and Harabel were like running the show with Grimmjow. I'd be like, he seems to still be alive out there, so I'm hoping. Or maybe they'll help beat Aizen after all this. I don't know, I just hope they're okay. It doesn't seem like it though. Because this seems to be the end of the road for the Espada, and it's no secret how much I've enjoyed talking about them as antagonists. Whether it's the fights they've had, deep dives into their personalities, or obviously, it's me talking about their number rankings. They've been an incredibly fun group of enemies to go up against, even if not all of them ended up being fantastic on their own. But the main threat for everyone else is still clearly Aizen. Even as he is surrounded by his enemies, and even after taking out his own ally, all of these people have good reason to bring this man down. He's betrayed so many people, and I hope now he can get what he deserves. So that's where we'll stop for now. Hope you all enjoyed the video. I hope I made it pretty clear how much Starrk surprised me, because oh boy, this was a great character and really caught me off guard. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you want to support the channel a little bit extra, then please join as a member if you'd like. I'll see you all next time. Hope you have a great day. Take care. Bye.